Hello, and welcome to the Banff at Altitude podcast, celebrating 50 years of adventure storytelling from the Banff Centre Mountain Film and Book Festival. Since its beginning in 1976, the Banff Centre Mountain Film and Book Festival has been a gathering place in celebration of all things mountain culture. The yearly festival, hosted at Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity, fosters an appreciation of the world's mountain places by creating opportunities for people to share and find inspiration in mountain experiences, ideas, and visions. Over the years, we've spoken to hundreds of incredible adventurers who share their spectacular and moving stories. My name is Joanna Croston, and I'm going to be digging through our festival archives to revive some of our favorite presentations from the past to get you stoked for what's to come in 2025, our 50th anniversary. And well, hopefully you'll be stoked for life in general. In continuing with this tradition of sharing stories and connections, we hope this podcast will inspire you to explore, preserve, and enjoy the great outdoors. Author, spoken word artist, and adventurer Craig Childs has written more than a dozen books of science, nature, and personal experience. In his book Atlas of a Lost World, Travels in Ice Age America, he follows ancient migration routes on foot, pursuing early Pueblo passages across the American Southwest, and he traces the paths of first peoples as they migrated into the Americas during the late Pleistocene. In 2019, Childs brought Atlas of a Lost World to Banff as part of our book festival. Sit back and enjoy the artistry of Craig Childs as he intertwines his own words, poetry, and adventures with ancient history.
Hi. Thanks for coming out this morning. Before dawn, I took a walk down to the town cemetery and wandered through the place in mostly dark, looking at the gravestones, pulling out my light, looking at dates and names of mothers and daughters and fathers, grandfathers, and wandering around all these names, all these memories in the ground, looking at the gravestones that are starting to tilt where tree roots are pushing them up. I wasn't down there because it's Halloween. Every place that I visit, I like to get a sense of time that is a little bit more than the sparkly skim of the now that we're in. I like to see that there is more going on in the world, that there are memories in the ground, that there are stories written that I cannot read right on the surface. And of course, I'm here to talk about the Ice Age, so when I'm there, I'm not just thinking about those gravestones of this moment, but I'm thinking of the fact that if you had stood here during the last glacial maximum 20,000 years ago, you'd be under about 3,000 vertical feet of ice. And you can feel the weight of that ice like a ghost around you. The only sound you can hear is the ping and the boom of ice quakes, but really the grind of so much weight of ice against hard limestone. And I imagine it sounded like steel on steel as that ice pushed its way, winnowing these mountains down to spindles and crags. The gravestones wouldn't last. None of this town would last under that kind of weight. Everything here turned into a fine, milky powder. I guess I'm a time traveler in a way. Whenever I'm in a place, I look for evidence of how much time has passed. I look for tectonics, the mountains pushed up, and the way the mountains are carved by ice. I look for these stories written in the land around me. When I say time traveler, it's not just an act of imagination, but it's an act of context, knowing where you are, what has happened here for how long. And when I left the graveyard this morning, left the cemetery, I found nearby this footprint in the concrete. And I thought, well, maybe that could survive. just a chunk caught up in all the glacial erratics and dumped somewhere and found who knows how far into the future. Somebody looking at this footprint and imagining who this was so long ago, who walked barefoot in concrete and left a story. That's what I'm interested in. When I say time travel, I'm interested in going back and finding out who was here, how long ago, what stories flowed through this place. When I wrote Atlas of a Lost World, I really did think of myself as traveling through time in almost a machine, where the dials and knobs are locations on the ground, where I would pick a spot like southern New Mexico and look to see where are there Paleolithic remains here, where were there people during the Ice Age, go back to the oldest site, so that's about 13,500 years ago. Look for where people were concentrated, where they left their tools, where they left their campfires. And the most important thing is you have to go there. You have to be in that place where there used to be a lake that stretched 2,000 square miles on the surface, formed by the Rio Grande jumping out of one drainage into another, and now it's sand. Go there to see how much has changed. Get some friends and move out into the landscape with them and start talking to them about this place. How do you react to this place? How do you see this sand flowing around you? How much time do you see here? Do you imagine that you're at the bottom of a lake right here in the Ice Age? Can you breathe the water down here? This is how much has changed over time. And I'm interested in the change. What was here then? What is here now? Walking through this lake that was around 15 to 20,000 years ago, you pay attention to these changes. You listen to the atmospheric concussions of missiles striking down because you're right next to the White Sands missile range, and you see the plumes rising up. And you look for artifacts, and maybe you're not finding Ice Age artifacts, you're finding pieces of shrapnel, you're finding memories of what's happening right now, but then also jump back and see what else was here, what other kind of weapons were in use 13,000 years ago. And so you start comparing them. What is happening now? What happened then? Or you find this. Does anybody know what this might be? It's teeth. It's beaver teeth. This is from an Ice Age beaver that, standing on its hind legs, would have been 6 feet tall. And so you have to change your perception of what was here. Change the animals. You're no longer thinking about grizzly bears. You're thinking about short-faced bears that would have been standing up, big. And also look to see what is in the area that you're studying. On the White Sands Missile Range, paleontologists have been finding mammoth trackways where mammoths walked in the sediment, in the soft sediment of these lake shores, and wherever they stepped, they made compressions. And so they're not actually fossilized. They're just thick pancakes, and the wind blows and exposes them and reveals these steps of Columbian mammoths that were walking across the old lake shore. And when they're exposed, these tracks only last months to years before they blow away. And so they've been waiting for 20,000 years, and they come to the surface, and then they're gone. I found a set of tracks while we were walking out there, 7 mammoth tracks, and they were vague shapes. They looked like badly cooked omelets slapped onto the ground, but the only way you could tell what they were was by saying, oh, left, right, I can see where a mammoth walked through right here. A Columbian mammoth, the largest mammoth in the world at the time, tusks 13 feet long. And there's something different about standing where there had been a mammoth, where you can see those 7 tracks. And I walked along with it. I could feel it right next to me. This was the space in the air that it occupied. This was one of the dials on the time machine that you set, and you see that animal right there. This is a track that was recently found out on the missile range of a ground sloth that would have stood about a story tall. and its trackway was found across this old lake bed. But what is curious about this one is that inside of its track is a human footprint. And so somebody was moving from track to track, and the gait of a ground sloth from the Ice Age is much larger than a human gait. So this person was jumping from track to track, and then you see where the sloth turned around as if to face something coming up from behind. A story of two animals, human and an Ice Age megafauna, meeting out on this lake. That's what I'm looking for. I walk across these landscapes, across these empty places, looking for the mountain ranges that they saw, the same horizons, and putting it all back together, seeing where people would have sat in the shoreline dunes, and seeing these tracks on the ground, these spaces left by stories before us. For this book, I traveled looking all over the Americas, mostly North America, from the coast of Siberia to Florida, and then down into southern Chile. And I'm looking for environments and landscapes that can take me back. This is the Harding Ice Field in southeast Alaska. And traveling there, getting a sense of, okay, I want to move across ice because they dealt with ice one way or another, especially coming across the land bridge. They would have faced a wall of ice on the New World side in the Americas. And so I want to move in that landscape, get a group together, say, okay, what would it have been like 20,000 years ago? What is it like now? Look at our equipment, look at the way we move, pick the people in your group because they would have done the same 20,000 years ago. They would have known exactly who they were traveling with, who had skills, who could do what. This is my friend David Stevenson, who has come here to Banff a number of times, who was on that trip. And so he was our elder. You always have to have an elder along to make the wiser decisions. And then there are the rest of us. And I'm asking these questions of why. Why would humans cross ice? When you're coming up against a 5 million square mile ice mass on the American side of the world, why would you get up on top of it and move? I mean, go back 20,000 years ago, people weren't that different from us. Maybe there were crazy people who just had to go, who couldn't stop.
Fuck.
Because we really haven't changed that much since then. 20,000 years ago, we were anatomically human. The only thing really different about us now is that our brain cases are 5% smaller. It could mean many things. But I can see them out there because I can see us out there looking out at the horizon. How did they see this world? Did horizons keep giving birth to themselves? The world just going on and on forever? Did they feel at all like they were lost? Did they ever wander into the abyss thinking, we're never going to get out of here. We're never going to get home? Did they know where they were going? How did they find routes? How do we find routes? How do we move through these landscapes? Because we have for so long. This is what we do. Humans with hands and feet. We move across terrain like water and we set our camps. Even if this isn't Ice Age material, we are the same people. We're using stoves and tools. But you got to have this thing if you want to go. You know what it is, looking over the horizon, wondering what's out there, what's a little farther along. You've got to have a little bit of craziness with you to move into some of these places and to disappear sometimes, to feel like you're just going off the edge. I was looking at how scientists have tweaked the foraging gene in fruit flies, and they keep going past their food. There ain't nothing out here. Out into empty places, that the more of a foraging gene you have, the farther you go. So there may be something written into us, into individuals saying, go past the horizon. Keep moving, keep seeing what's out there. You look up, you find nunataks sticking out of the ice, these summits that are exposed, and they would be just standing out there on the open plain of ice. and you climb them, and you get to the top, and you look around, and that is your map. That is your world. You see where you're going next by getting up high. You look for signs. You look for a feather left in the snow where a raven flew in from somewhere else, and you follow its tracks across the pillow of a cornice and see where it flew on, and you know something about how animals moved into this place. You know something about how this world works. That's how I think we move through terrain. This map was made by Sarah Gilman, who was on that trip on the ice, and she did the artwork for Atlas of a Lost World, and I asked her to draw 20,000 years ago in North America. And the reason the map is sideways is because the map of North America on my wall I put sideways. I didn't want to see a familiar continent. I wanted to see something that I didn't know about. I kept pretending this is another planet. You're not from this place. You don't know what's ahead, but there is this mass of ice. Let's get to the nuts and bolts of where people were and when. A recent find, or a recent re-find out of a cave in the Yukon Territory had people there 27,000 years ago. On the other side, dates have been coming out recently to 16,000 years. So to get from there to there, thinking an 1,800-mile crossing of ice, which the Scott expedition had 2,000 miles to the South Pole and back, and none of them made it. But then I think these are badasses in the Paleolithic. So sure, it could happen. But then there are other sites. In Pennsylvania, a site that has carbonized basket fragments that look like they're going back to 19,000 years. So if you're going to get there, you're going to walk all the way across from here to Pennsylvania, 3,500 miles of ice. I don't know, after doing that, crossing the Harding ice field, I came away going, you know what? I don't think this is how people do it. Because to get across, you need more than a gang of yahoos heading out into the ice. You've got to have uncles and grandmothers and children, and the ice is just not a great place for that. And you start looking across the Americas, and you see sites from the Ice Age popping up all over. A 20,000-year-old site in central Texas, then very rich sites. Hard to get the radiocarbon dates on them in Florida because of the amount of water there, but at least back to 15,000, 16,000 years. 23,000 years on the coast, Chesapeake Bay, where a tool was dredged up along with a mammoth skeleton by a scallop dredge, a mastodon skeleton. And mastodon skeleton came to 23,000 years, and this tool was inside of it. So that was a human site. But then, is that the way to get here? The going theory now is that not necessarily people crossing the land bridge and coming in across the ice, but coming by boat along the coast. There was boat use going back on the Asian side of the Pacific Rim 36,000 years. And so it's looking like people were coming down by boat along the coast, following the rich kelp beds. And then once they got there, you just see sites moving in along rivers. The coasts are filling up. And during the Ice Age, North America was occupied. People were here from coast to coast. So we'll drop into one of the spots, take this time machine, and move it to Florida, to the Panhandle, to rivers flowing through forests, where I'm used to running rivers out in the west that have canyons. And I don't know if you've ever floated a river in Florida, but it just spreads out. And it becomes a swamp, or it disappears into a hole, and you're carrying your kayak over your shoulder through the forest, looking for another hole where the river comes back up. This place during the Ice Age was one of the richest zones in the Americas. A scuba diver, a paleontologist, went into one of these rivers. This is the Wasissa. He went into the next river over, and in 6 hours of swimming the river bottom, he found 13 articulated mastodon and mammoth skeletons. The ground is made of this history, and this part of Florida had the highest concentration of saber-toothed cats and dire wolves in all of the Americas. So while I was writing this book, I had this sitting on the desk next to me. And this is a saber-toothed cat. And it was my reminder of what life could have been like. When I think of what we face now, when we worry about mountain lions and grizzly bears, when you had 500-pound cats all over the place, and you look at these teeth, and they're sharp on the front and the back. They're designed with an almost 90-degree jaw opening to get into a large animal and just rip. And so this is a ripper. Then I'm looking at a Homotherium, another large cat, a 400-pound cat that had similar teeth, but it had serrations on the back side, more for carving in and then peeling back chunks of flesh. So I'm asking questions in this book of, okay, which one would you want to have kill you? I'm thinking that this would be just lots of tearing and screaming, but the other one, the Homotherium, would come and just pull off hunks of steak from your body and more screaming. So this is what's on my mind when I'm traveling through Florida. And I'd never been on rivers like this. There were alligators and snakes hanging from the trees. Snakes hanging from trees, it's a terrible thing. So I'm facing that level of, okay, it's a snake in a tree. What would it be like if it were a saber-toothed cat? How would you feel about this? During the Ice Age, Florida was about twice the size because the sea was 400 feet lower. And so water tables were down, and these, instead of sinkholes, these were dry caves. And this is where you find a lot of the artifacts and paleontological remains. The stomach of a mastodon came out of one of these sinkholes with everything still in it. So down in the anaerobic depths, all this material is preserved. I talked to a paleontologist who went in, suited up, and dropped down about 40 feet to the bottom of a sinkhole, where he said the sediments and the tannin in the water made it just completely dark. You had to stand there and wait for the sediment of your landing to settle back down, and then you turned on your spotlight. And he said the megafauna bones glowed back at him. And his analogy was, did you ever see Pulp Fiction? When they open the briefcase, there's something in there that you never get to see what it is, but it glows on your face. He said, that's what it was like. It was Pulp Fiction at the bottom of the sinkhole. And down there is where he would find bones, tusks, the remains of these animals, and tools, spear points, the signs of Ice Age animals and people living together. We were just going up and down these rivers, going out to the Gulf Coast and finding our way back up. And on the Wassissa here, it's a shallow, clear river. And people in the 1980s were walking out there, and they found the skull of a Ice Age bison. And in it, they found the tip of a stone projectile snapped off in the skull of this bison. And it didn't actually penetrate the brain case. So you see this and you wonder, what happened here? This was a blow from a human being, but it was not a killing blow. Was it somebody who was throwing an atlatl at the head of a charging bison? Was it a bison that had been killed already and it was just snapped off in the skull? What is the story here? It is a story of a meeting. I don't know what it is, but it says that humans and giant animals were here at the same time. When we think of Ice Age, we often think of ice, but so much of the Americas were exposed. Canada was almost entirely under ice, except for parts of the Northwest Territory, for most of the Ice Age. Eventually, there was a split. The big Laurentide ice sheet separated from the Cordilleran ice sheet and opened up a corridor. And so people started coming in from the Bering Land Bridge around 13,000 years ago. There are multiple waves of people coming in, people living along the edges of these glaciers down in Montana, Wisconsin. I was writing about something that happened 12,800 years ago, there was a dramatic climate change. The Ice Age had been ending for about 4,000 or 5,000 years, really warming up, getting to almost current temperatures. So huge waterfalls, rivers flooding. Ice melt was incredible, and the ice here was starting to retreat into the mountains, so you're actually seeing the mountains around Banff, starting to see the Rockies come out. And then suddenly, within 10 years, climate went back into full Ice Age conditions. The Ice Age machine turned back on. And to get a sense of what this was like, I headed up to northern Wisconsin, the shore of Lake Superior, where there was an event happening in 2014. It was the polar vortex, where Arctic cold was coming down across the bulk of North America. And I wanted to write about what happened back in this cold spell called the Younger Dryas climate anomaly. And I thought the way to do this, if you're really a time traveler, you need to go into the coldest that you can. So I set off across Lake Superior during the polar vortex event, just loaded gear onto a toboggan, and went for a stroll for a few days. And it was a miserable experience. Beautiful and strange. Places where the wind had scoured down and revealed the ice below you, which you think about all the time as you're going across the ice. You're wearing the big nail spikes around your neck in case it breaks through, but it's not going to break through. It's 3 or 4 feet thick. So at night, it is just booming because it's getting down to 30 below zero and the ice is crushing itself. And so all night long, it sounds like lightning bolts, thunder streaking across the ice. That night, I set my camp out on the lake, and the sun set. And I had really been disappointed because it had been 50 below the week before, and I thought, yeah, that's the right temperature. And it warmed up to 30 below, and I just went, oh, this could have been really good. I think at 50 below, I would have definitely died. I went around town before I did this and just said, hey, I'm going to do this trip. Do you have any advice? People who do wilderness trips in northern Wisconsin. And they all went, well, yeah, you could do that. And they said, we could drive out tonight and drop you off some gear and have a little party. And I said, no, I need to feel this. And so they gave me advice. Don't take a tent, they said, because it'll just turn into an ice palace from your breath. So just take a bivvy and a big bag. And so I set up this miserable little camp. And I did not sleep at all that night, listening to the booms under my back, thinking, this is okay, right? This lake isn't going to open up and swallow me. How fast could I cut my way out of my sleeping bag and bivvy and start running and then freeze to death somewhere out there? Rolling all night, trying to keep the frostbite moving from spot to spot. Waking up in the morning, actually not waking, I did not sleep. Taking an hour to break and cut the ice off the zipper. I mean, I know there are mountaineers who do this all the time, but I live in the desert, where even on cold days, you open up all your stuff and you just bask in the sun, which is what I did when I got out of my bag. I unzipped because the sun was clear, and I opened up, and then I went, and closed because it's not the desert. This behaves differently. So I decided that this was not a good thing to do. I was not going to go spend 4 more nights out on the lake, and I retreated,
It was a very long night. I don't remember sleeping. I think I slept a little bit. You had to keep your feet moving all night. And it's been an especially long morning. I still can't feel my toes, but hopefully my toes will return. But the sun's up. I'm not sure that really counts for anything, but it's up. So, good morning. You know, I think I'm concluding that in the Ice Age, people didn't live here. I mean, okay, let me take that back. In the summer, they moved up to Boundary Waters and made tools around Knife Lake 12,000 years ago. And maybe before that, they came up and hunted in the summer. But God, I don't think they were up here in the winter. Maybe they were. I'm really wondering what I'm doing up here in the winter. Freezing. That's what I'm doing.
So I decided to backtrack, and I had built a snow shelter a few days before that with some students from Northland College, and I decided that that would be the next spot. And that night, I crawled down through the hole into this quinsy, going inside to this space where the students had spent the night after I was there, and they had left tea candles, which I lit, and they left a thermometer where the temperature went from 20-something below up to a balmy 10 below, which felt so, so sweet. And I felt like I was part of evolution, that I was learning night by night how to do it a little differently, where at 10 below I could just open up everything, and it was so comfortable. And that night was so quiet and still, and you know what it's like inside of a snow shelter. You don't really have a sense of direction. You don't hear anything. It feels like you're inside of a clamshell. It feels like you are buried under the weight of so much time. I remember that night just lying there looking at the ceiling and the flicker of the candlelight, thinking, how many people have done this? How many generations, thousands of years have been under the snow, waiting? I think of the stories that are down there, where we came from. All of us, no matter who we are, we all have stories, all have lines that trace back. There was an archaeological site that I visited in central Texas where they put a post out in front of the dig showing their confusion as to where people might have come from in the Paleolithic. The top sign pointing to Siberia, looking at the most likely crossing on the land bridge and people coming by boat from Asia. The sign below that pointing towards Spain, suggesting an arrival around 20,000 years ago of people from northern Spain and southern France landing around Chesapeake Bay. This is the tool that came up with that mastodon in Chesapeake Bay at 23,000 years old, and it's identical to tools that were being made in Spain and France at the time. There are enough of these, hundreds of these artifacts that suggest there was a landing that people came across, and it's a tricky thing to write about because white supremacists have taken that and said, yes, we were first, and you're going, no, there's no we here. This is Paleolithic, European, and they probably did not live very long. They showed up, lived long enough to leave tools, but there's no genetic record, so this was a failed arrival. But there were probably many such arrivals, people coming from many directions at many different times. One of the most significant Ice Age sites in the Americas is Monteverde on the coast of Chilean Patagonia. One scientist that I talked to called it the Gilligan's Island of the Paleolithic. What were people doing out here going back to it? Right now, it looks like dates are heading to 17,000 and 19,000 years. They may go back to 30,000 years. But then there should be another arrow on that sign that points straight down. Not Siberia, Spain, or Monteverde, but the earth. Old stories. There aren't just the stories of people walking, migrating. There are older stories, Hopi, Blackfoot, Tlingit. So many stories of arrival, emergence. At this site in Texas, I walked down into the main trench, down through the layers, coming down, seeing history appearing layer by layer, charcoal, flakes, stone tools, bones, all the way down to Clovis age, and then down below that, 20,000 years ago, there were people at the bottom of this trench which was not a trench at the time, of course. But I look at that and I say, this is emergence. There were pumps working nonstop to keep this trench from filling with water, with the groundwater. Everything was wet. And in so many of the old stories, the Hopi stories of emergence coming out of a flooding former world, of a lake underground where the people were born, there are stories of coming from the darkness, coming out of water, coming to this place, this surface. There are many different ways of telling this story. And at the bottom, I thumbed through the artifacts that they were finding, and I found this one. This was the oldest at the time, which was 15,500 years old. They've since gone down to 20,000 years. But holding this in my hand, talk about the dial and knob of a time machine. You're holding something that somebody last touched 15,500 years ago, and it was still wet, amniotic from birth. These are the stories that I look for. This is why I walk to a cemetery in the morning. This is why I feel the weight of the glaciers around us, 3,000 feet deep right now. You can hear the ping and crack of the quakes. You can hear the scrape whittling these mountains down to spindles and crags. You can see time flowing all around you. Thank you for listening.
So who wants to dress up as a 6-foot beaver next Halloween? 5'11", 3/4. But if you have questions, please make your way to the microphones.
Craig, how did you become a time traveler?
You know, I was a time traveler from very early on. When I was a kid, I used to walk through culverts and pretend that when I got out on the other side, it's still going to look the same, but I'm going to be living with dinosaurs. I grew up in Arizona and in Colorado, and I spent a lot of time on the ground, and I spent a lot of time in museums. I loved going in Denver, the Museum of Natural History. They had this giant Columbian mammoth skeleton, and I just remember standing under it, and the dinosaurs were cool, but I thought, this is something we knew that humans encountered, and I'm kind of a flight of fancy person, so my imagination is looking for something, and time, of course, is always so present. You know, I spend a lot of my time in the desert where geology is exposed everywhere, so you're looking at 100-million-year-old wind patterns in sandstone and seeing back through time everywhere. So I kind of imagine we all do, that we all see a crack in a sidewalk and go, oh, this city is going to be obliterated. You can see what's happening around you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm curious about your thoughts on what drove the eastward migration. Maybe that's too big of a subject.
My thoughts on what drove people to migration? Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's what people do. We are stressed and we have to migrate. There's a push factor, there's a pull factor. You know, we're pushed out by other hunters, by disease, by something negative. We're pulled by something positive. I think every animal, every living thing is in motion all the time. It's a combination of desperation and I think just basic need. Because some people end up where they don't want to be. I talked to a Russian archaeologist who had just moved to Alaska, and she was saying, you know, if you want to understand migration, you need to leave your country. You need to go somewhere and never go back, never move back there and deal with the pain of that. And it was in a bar in Anchorage that we were having this conversation, and she looked at me intensely and said, migration is a sickness. Because she was dealing with it right then. She was going, I'm not going to be moving back to Russia. I live here now. And she was letting me know that this is not an easy thing. And I've talked to Hopi about it. You know, I've said, well, what's the future of migration? And they go, whoa, 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 whoa. That is such a painful thing to go through. Let's not talk about migrating again. We are in our Pueblo now. We are home. Let's not go. So I think it's this combination of people who want to stay and are forced to go, and people maybe like me and more so like a lot of people in this audience who are watching the horizon going, I don't know what's over there, but we're going to go. So it's what we do. Every living thing needs a certain number to be going out there and finding a niche and staying there in case the home population is depleted. Then you've got a new habitat. So we're constantly moving, and it's terrifying though, because in some ways I felt like a cheerleader for humanity in this book, going, look at us migrating, look what we do, and then I go, oh my God, we are everywhere and we're eating everything. That's what we do.
Given your perspective of the whole picture, what do you think of the current hysteria toward global warming?
I think the hysteria is a problem. I think the panic is a problem. I think assessment is what we need to be doing and not screaming and running. But that's my take on this, that I look back at the end of the Ice Age, which was a catastrophic climate change. Nothing like what we're seeing now. Ice ages are notoriously unstable, intense temperature changes. Sea levels were rising at rates that you would have seen shorelines just disappearing within years. So they saw some extraordinary changes, and I look at what we're seeing now, and my book before this one was more about the long-term climate changes on the planet. And I think what we're looking at now is actually fairly small, but has a long range and has the possibility of changing this planet significantly. I spent a lot of time with climate researchers for that book, and I understand the panic. I mean, things will change, and it will be devastating, and there is reason to panic. But I also think, okay, just settle down, find the problem, the million problems, figure out what you can do, what can be done, but don't light yourself on fire just yet. That's my take.
I want to thank you for House of Rain, and I'm about to read your next book for me, but I want to ask a question about this movement, migration, how quickly people moved, against how they were looking for new foods. They were familiar with what they'd left behind. They were looking for new sources of material. Could you share with us your thoughts on how that dynamic worked, how quickly they could move, and how well they were able to do encountering new resources as they went?
I think they actually moved slowly, but individuals probably moved quickly. I was writing about coastal travel, and the coast was occupied so rapidly that it goes beyond models for just living and foraging in a spot and then moving on. There were probably people who were just paddling, who were just going. And that's why you have sites in southern South America so early, is because they just moved, and they probably came back and said, hey, we went through all these different terrains and environments, and then in South America, or whatever they were calling it, we came back to glaciers and mountains, and it's just that the stars were upside down and the moon was upside down, but we were back home again. You guys got to come down and check this out. So I imagine there were small groups moving ahead, but you couldn't move too far. You needed a base population. Just a group of 10 out at the edge of the world, that's extinct. You've got to have your genetic source to get back to. So I imagine it was a lot of moving out fast, mixing back, stories coming from ahead, travelers saying, we found this and this. There were rivers, there were glaciers. But I think in the real world, it happened pretty slowly, that most people were just saying, okay, we're in our spot, and we have traditions to hold here, and we have reasons to be here. So it's a combination, but the timeline is hard to get because Ice Age was a long time ago, and a lot of the artifacts are missing, and most of the coastal sites are under 400 feet of water. So that's still unfolding.
I've done quite a bit of archaeology and replications and traveling with old tools, birch bark canoes, skin boats, and stuff like that. To this migration thing, in the books they call it ethnographic analogy. So there's a lot of ethnographic evidence of people traveling from Alaska to Ellesmere and staying in Ellesmere. So those are Independence One people, the pre-Dorset people, very, very early, that were traveling huge distances without dogs and doing it, I'd say, rather gracefully in a climate that I have to correct you that the deserts aren't the only place to live. Remember that Alaska was so wealthy in the Arctic where you could hunt whales and live on and use skins and so on wisely. So when you build your quincies, I'll bring you along a caribou jacket. You'll be way... So that's one thing in your book I missed a little bit, but it's tremendous that as a communicator that you're bringing this out to the greater public. Us humans are so innovative and so resilient, and we travel back and forth. But one thing for me as a material archaeologist is to bring forth the resilience in how they travel. To your point of, you suffered, but somebody who, say, an Inuit right now, they'd just laugh. They'd say, that's the best time of year. I can go hunting polar bear out in the ice, and they'd be dressed and toasty warm. About a mile away from here, I got caribou katigi that you could come and try on, and I'll put you outside and you'll be just sweating. Anyway, great job, and I'm glad you're out there and speak so well.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
We're very much looking forward to having Craig back in Banff for the 2025 festival to present his latest book, The Wild Dark. Be sure to find all of Craig's books in your local bookstore. Join the festivities and help us celebrate 50 years of adventure stories at the heart of the festival here in Banff. Check out our website at banffmountainfestival.ca. This episode was produced by Anique C. and is a production of Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity. The theme music was composed by Jacques Blackstone. A special thanks to our audio engineer Ben Ewing and the production team at Banff Centre, as well as the folks from the Paul D. Fleck Library.